Step into analysis, please.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking about Season 2, Episode 9, Vanishing Point. Before we get started, I wanted to give a big thank you to Alt-Shift-X, who gave me a shout out in his video last week, encouraging people to visit my channel. To come across that was an amazing thing. And Alt, if you see this, buddy, just know you're a rock star and an inspiration. But without further ado, let's overthink an HBO show about robots. Starting off with the title, Vanishing Point, which commonly you may know as the artistic term for what you see on the screen now, the point in which two parallel lines appear to converge. This applies perfectly to this episode because William's stories and identity, two parallel lives of the same person, one inside and one outside of the park, have now been exposed, and he's at the point of convergence. This episode can be divided into William past and present, Bernard, and Dolores. This entire hour of time seemed to draw me in, filling in the space in between William's lives and how Juliet degraded to the point of suicide. Overall, it was a much needed episode, and I'm so glad that we got it, and it was executed perfectly. It begins with William, Juliet, Emily, and Ford at a party in the real world, a black tie event in which the company elites will attend to congratulate themselves. This party appears to be specifically for William. It opens to William discussing a stain, something that has been there for years, and how the only person who could see through him was Juliet. So this is what the stain means, and understanding this part shapes his character as a whole. This stain is William hiding who he really is. He understands his want to hurt and take pleasure in things otherwise restricted to the park. He craves being a black hat, but in the real world, it's not reality. He uses his motivation after leaving the park and overthrows his brother-in-law, causing his downward spiral. He turns the park into something that could potentially gain immortality and harkens on the fact that he needs to keep these two identities separate, remain as the good guy in the outside world while still indulging in the vices of the park, his dark passenger, if you've ever watched Dexter. Juliet sees through this because, well, she's his wife, and eventually you learn everyone's tells. And, of course, Logan. You see, after the ousting from the family business, Logan would not have gone down without a fight. He tells his sister and his niece all the bad things William has done and paints the picture that he just used Juliet to get into the family business where he usurped his way to power, and there he rests, making her just a pawn and not a partner, not a wife. This maddening idea probably didn't seem like much at first when he brought it up, so I imagine Logan tried his best over years to save his family and show who William really was. But no one listened. That was until, of course, he took his own life. Juliet says he did something grand for Emily's charities, tells him that it confirms her father's suspicions that he was a Marxist, and how she wishes her father could be there to enjoy this moment. This is great writing for two reasons. One, him being a Marxist would make him anti-capitalist, which is what allowed James Delos to build everything their family has. After all, he is a relentless businessman. So him being called a Marxist defines that subtle but existing line of him infiltrating the family with his opposing views. Then when she says she wishes her father could be there to experience that, William feels guilty and looks down because he's not there because he failed his mission. He failed to transfer him over, and thus the responsibility of his absence. We next see him with his daughter at the same party. They share a moment about social anxieties they feel and how Juliet is now drunk and needs to be tended to. He walks to the bar where he finds Ford. Now, the scene with Ford is very revealing. Firstly, look at the symbolism of this scene. William stands in front of a reflecting surface in the shape of a cross. Ford sits below a chandelier, highlighting the space above him like a halo, perhaps meaning many things, but I take this as Ford as a heavenly figure, with William standing before his cross before he's crucified, before he dies, and perhaps, just perhaps, before he is brought back to life like Jesus rising from the dead. The next important part comes when Ford discusses the research project bleeding into the park. This could be taken as Ford finding out about the company's plan to get rid of him, or Akichita finding the valley beyond all those years ago. I don't think it's either. I think the context of this conversation highlights something more, like the Forge potentially being built as an artificial intelligence. Perhaps, like William later said, they didn't know what they needed, so maybe they built an artificial neural network to learn and assist with their building of a digital human mind. Then, like the soft-headed boy, William applied the self-learning AI to a copy of the Cradle software, making it now the Forge, and it learned from each of its subjects, which are human minds. Also, that maybe it's not confined any longer to just the Forge systems, and because of what it's learning from, it could be more insidious than William calculated. Let me prove it. The conversation begins with Ford stating his project has broke the agreement. Not his people, not him, his project, followed by what was the last time you examined your creation, the entity in which you created, and what it's been learning about its subjects, finishing with the self-knowledge is the thing that drew you to the park in the first place, then sliding him a data storage device which just happens to be a self-portrait of who William really is. So let's get weird. What if this system has been learning from its subjects, the wealthiest of the wealthy, those who are sick and demented enough to go to this park and enjoy the rape and murder without consequence? I don't want to say they're about to go up against HAL 9000, but if an artificial intelligence is learning from a subject base of those people, I imagine its data store isn't that pure. They get home and Juliet begins mocking him, calling him Billy, knowing that he hates it, something that Logan also did, so it may be an homage back to when Logan would call him Billy. She states that she can feel his anger and that it's time for his yearly pilgrimage back to the park. So maybe William has convinced her that he goes there once a year to blow off steam, like it's his effing vacation because he hates being in the outside world so much. What's interesting is that he goes there so often to also perform the fidelity test. So maybe the relationship between William and Delos was genuine, that what she witnessed was just her husband claiming to need this vacation, when in reality it was so that he could mask the project from her. In my opinion, it was maybe a bit of both. We know William has been many times and knows the storylines well. Juliet breaks down accusing William of consuming her family for reasons that I stated previously, and Emily witnesses it. From her point of view, she is witnessing her alcoholic mother swearing that her father is a virus, destroying their family, when he just donated massive amounts of money to her charities. She sides with her father and puts William in a unique position. You can tell that he wants the issue dropped. For her to not go to a shrink and face her alcoholism because she wasn't crazy. He was a piece of shit. But he allows the daughter to ignorantly attack the mother, and as William tries to move past it and bring Juliet upstairs, she breaks away and demands that William doesn't love either of them. But of course, the daughter is just seeing her mother lashing out at her do-good philanthropist father. William places the data storage device in between some books and accidentally tells her that he was the piece of shit that she feared before finding his profile. Emily calls a shrink and they discuss forcing her into medical care, which I imagine is a terrifying thing to say the least. The water starts to drip on the table and he runs upstairs to find his wife dead. Something interesting about this scene are the angles they use to display it. He runs up the stairs, we see the bottom of the tub here, he gets closer, and we see this off angle we've seen before. Then finally he arrives at this panning image to reveal her lifeless body. A couple things to note. The blood in the water is odd. It's entirely possible to take too many of a certain kind of medicine and bleed to death internally. But no blood or foam is exiting her mouth, and blood seems to be originating from the back of her head or neck, and I can only explain this by she maybe fell during the encounter and smashed her head against the tub. It may not be important. I'm very open to other theories that are more Westworldy. Something about the placement of all of this is really weird as well. The idea that it is actually two different events could also be occurring. We learned the thing that drove Juliet to take her own life was seeing the profile of William, created by the Forge, showing the deeds that he has done. I imagine she had such an intense response because the stories told to her by Logan were true. He was a monster in the park. So if he was right about that, he was probably right about everything else. So she knew her daughter wouldn't listen, that she would be viewed as crazy, and instead of exist in that hell any longer, she took her own life, placing the profile where hopefully her daughter would find it. And she does. Something I want to highlight is the category 47B. So I have a theory, which I think perfectly describes this line from the interaction with Lawrence that has been stuck on my mind this entire season.
I have received my judgment all the same, Morris, and I take issue with it. Because up until this point, the stakes in this place haven't been real. So I'm going to fight my way back and appeal the verdict.
So I discussed this previously as an authoritative figure telling one of the most powerful people in the world he likely isn't permitted to exist in the valley beyond. The theory at the time had holes because firstly, who could tell William that? He built the place, and why would they bar him? What could he have done so bad to be judged and given a sentence that he needed to repeal? It's the stain. It's the thing he's been hiding this entire time. It's the real him sticking out because you can't hide from science. You can't hide from what makes you you. It's also why he didn't like the shrink coming when his daughter said that she called one. Science shows that he has issues. More importantly, the science of the Forge has collected and documented who he is, who James Delos was, who was likely number one, as well as thousands of other people, and developed the minds over time, getting them further and further each time until they have long-term viable solutions. But the Forge likely found that William was an unstable subject for this experiment. The very person he so drastically tries to conceal is exposed on this little tablet, and for William it means that he isn't permitted access. Think about the red tone of the screen, highlighting something bad, of course, the conditions, but more so the category. In big bold letters, 47B, meaning other categories of people exist. The other categories likely aren't witnessing these conditions and would be better fitted to exist in the Forge. In summary, he was told he couldn't enter the Forge because he was a delusional, paranoid subtype who would otherwise be a terrible addition to this experiment and their testing. Or at least that's my theory. The next storyline we come to is William and Emily. So after finding her father with the Ghost Nation, she takes him to a rally point. It's interesting that they have these stations, but the purpose is healing and supplies. She manages to fix his bullet wounds or patch him up to the best of her ability because it does look like he does still have a wobbly, injured-like tendency. The big takeaways are William is suffering from paranoia and delusions, and the daughter knows this. Based on the way the funeral was described, I would say that she found the jewelry box before the funeral, and that's why he describes such anger toward him when it really should have been like her still blaming herself at that point. But she finds the profile and learns all the stories from Uncle Logan were true, and he himself, his essence is just one big lie. Her plan is revealed, wanting to expose this entire place and have her father committed. He mows down the Delos team and then, Happy Father's Day, murders his own daughter. Or did he? Well, let me blow your mind. It doesn't really matter. Instead of argue about the inconclusive evidence for or against, the scene is left in such a way that we as an audience are meant to feel what William is feeling, unsure and unknowing. The idea that he killed his daughter is impactful and heavy and really needed. We need to know that the show isn't afraid to kill off people without them being brought back later on in some way. But the fact that the scan isn't revealed and he makes eye contact with it, knowing that she was getting scanned and chooses to spray down the whole party anyway, means she may be. Again, that's the point. William is suffering from paranoia, and in this place it's impossible to ever know. Even looking from the outside, these events are impossible to decipher. Oh well, Hax, I don't know, he could have just looked at the scanner and then known right away. Well, what if it did say she wasn't a host? After all, this was only scanning for the explosive in the vertebrae, and hosts can be built without that. At this point, he was still convinced it was Ford's game. The paradox is maddening, and this mixed with a documented paranoia is impossible. It leads to his gesture where he is constantly checking to see if he can feel a hard line going through his arm. It builds, and as he's about to take his own life, grief-riddled because he probably checked and confirmed it was the real Emily. Otherwise, why would he be so grief-stricken? He must have searched further off-screen and found it to be his real daughter. He wouldn't have just walked away after feeling that and thinking she was a host so strongly. So he begins cutting into his own arm to see if he is a robot, and he will keep cutting and may never be satisfied with the answer because it can always be backdoored with, what if I'm just being programmed not to see the hard line? The next storyline we come to is Dolores and Teddy. They're intercepted by Ghost Nation forces on their way to the Valley Beyond. Akecheta isn't there, so he is likely leading the bulk of the group. Dolores claims they don't understand what they are working toward, and the Valley Beyond is a tool, and she's going to use it against the humans. Earlier in the season, she also called it a weapon. Now, consider the theory about it being a self-learning artificial intelligence. Well, right now, it's secure in a research project. But from the scene with Ford and William, it may be reaching into other things such as the park. So I propose Dolores will use this data and expose to the world every powerful person who has ever visited this place and potentially maybe even turn the AI loose on the World Wide Web. The data of all the terrible things that people could do in this park would cause unforeseeable chaos, and at first economic crashes until finally civil and foreign wars break out across the planet. I don't see the show creators having Dolores print 1 billion Teddys to stomp over the land and murder everyone. The more strategic route is to abuse the very human emotions we feel toward each other and have us just kill each other using the data and using the AI to disrupt or shut down systems all over the world. Fighting breaks out and Teddy kills all but one host, allowing him to leave and shaking just slightly. It would appear that the attempt that Dolores made to make him a more malleable follower didn't work. Or perhaps Maeve is speaking to Teddy at this point, protecting the friend of Akecheta. The end of the scene shows Teddy taking his own life as they stand in a barn that for whatever reason just throws me off. Teddy expresses what I interpret as free will, citing issues with identity and how nothing is real. His disposition is warranted, his cornerstone has abused his mind, and he gives confirmation that he is in fact awake and remembering everything now. So again, Maeve may have something to do with this scene previously because as far as we know to that point, Teddy wasn't remembering his past, and now he remembers everything. We see a flashback of Teddy being born and witnessing Dolores for the first time. You see a young Ford in the corner, and you can also see Maeve in the reflection. Hint, hint. Teddy talks about how she changed him, and this scene here happens.
Made me into a monster.
I made it so you could survive.
What's the use of surviving if we become just as bad as them?
Well, if you recall, Dolores was made into the Wyatt character so that she could survive this place, becoming just like the humans who haunted these hallowed grounds for so long. So does this foreshadow a time where Dolores has that same revelation in the future? The scene overall was great. Very well done. The music score, the emotion displayed by the actors, beautiful. Moving on to the final storyline, Bernard. It begins at the Mesa where they reverse engineer the code allowing Maeve such control, and the evil Delos engineers command Clementine to turn the hosts against each other. Bernard leaves a message for Maeve before finding Elsie waiting by the vehicles. The message, of course, is the heartbreaking interaction between Maeve and Ford. We learn more about Ford's desires for Maeve and wanting her to be free from this place. We learn it was Ford who made her, his favorite, his child, understanding that Maeve sacrificed to save her own child, and how Ford wanted to do the same, to see his children set free and stay behind to ensure as much. As one final gift for Maeve, Ford unlocks the core permissions and then vanishes. We come back to Elsie and Bernard before leaving, and it's again reinforced that Ford wants Bernard to believe he can't trust Elsie. This is probably nothing to do with her directly, but more that she is a human and will side with her own species when push comes to shove. He reveals the forge to Elsie, with all the guests' minds mapped to a super cradle, and man, I hope it's more than just a giant server room. The visual of seeing thousands of those James Delos pods would be something amazing to see, and he does say they were doing the same thing they were doing to James Delos to everyone who has visited the park, so we may in fact see that. They stop and gather ammo from the dead Delos staff, and Ford continues that she can't be trusted. Bernard fights back, but Ford allows this to be his choice, then stating it's not just about him, it's the origin story of an entire species, and how they need to open the door. So it looks like Bernard will be the one opening the door. Bernard tries to delete Ford from his mind, and though it appears he does, he probably did not. Elsie finds Bernard with his arm tied and freaks out. Bernard decides to just leave her here instead of have her be in danger, leaving her with a strange device QA can apparently track. Cold, man. Didn't even leave her with a bucket or protein bars this time. So this was a lot to take in. William's true nature revealed to us. The idea that he could or could not be a host is very real. Bernard will be the person who opens the door and also wants to stop this entire thing. The Forge is a super cradle with potentially a self-learning AI who has some daddy issues. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you felt that I left something out, please put it down in the comments below. If you enjoy content like this, please do consider subscribing, and a big shout out to the highest donors of the month on Patreon: John Levin, Robert Holtz, Chris Cole, Sammy Barras, Vanessa Cano, Greg Purnell, Michael Linck, and Hank S. The great 8 mates that I hold dear, thank you all, much love, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon.